aby prišiel Andrew Tucker. Ja sa pokúsim to tu prehodiť do iného modu. Preklad máte do slúchadiek. Kto potrebuje, tak môžete si ešte vypýtať. Andrew.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, good morning. Thank you so much for the invitation and wonderful to be with you this morning. I want to talk to you this morning about lawfare, the use and the misuse of international law and the international legal system to undermine the sovereignty of the state of Israel. This idea of lawfare and the use of law is not new. We see it not only in the Israel field, but in many areas. The legal system, of course, is a very powerful weapon for all parties. And it's, of course, not only Israel's enemies who use the law system, but also Israel itself. You've seen that the International Criminal Court has issued arrest warrants against the Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu and former Defense Minister Gallant. Today, or actually yesterday evening, Israel appealed that decision. They submitted a document to the court challenging the court's jurisdiction. That's also the using the legal system. I think since October the 7th, we have seen globally an unleashing of anti-Semitism, but also anti-Zionism. This, more than ever before, people are challenging the legitimacy of Zionism, the right of the Jewish people to exist as a nation, and therefore the right of Israel to be a Jewish state in the Middle East. And the international legal system, the UN-based legal order, is being used very much to achieve this objective. I want to talk to you today about the resolution that was passed by the General Assembly on the 18th of September this year, which calls upon every UN member state to pressure Israel, to force Israel to remove both its military and civilians from the so-called occupied Palestinian territory, the OPT. This is the West Bank, or Judea and Samaria as it is known to the Jewish people. It is East Jerusalem, and it is the Gaza Strip. This is regarded by the General Assembly and by the courts as belonging to the Palestinians, and Israel has no right to be present in any sense in those territories. It's connected with the other cases that are happening in the international courts. The International Criminal Court is prosecuting Israeli and Hamas leaders for war crimes, crimes against humanity. The court also considers that these territories belong to the Palestinians. And we need to understand where this resolution has come from. I want to talk about the advisory opinion of the International Court of Justice in July this year, which opened the way for the resolution. And I want to talk with you about what the response should be of Slovakia and other UN member states to this resolution. Are you obliged as a state to force Israel out of these territories? That is what the UN is asking of you. And in my opinion, that is not the case. I think the court got the law wrong. I think the court misunderstands what is actually happening. And therefore, I think that the General Assembly, which is a biased, one-sided institution, is imposing a narrative, a historical narrative, a legal narrative. And Western states, European and other Western states, should be taking a position. That's the case that I want to put to you today. So in a short presentation, in the minutes that I have, I'd like to do three things. First, give you a little sense of the geographical and strategic significance of these territories. What are we talking about when we talk about the occupied Palestinian territory? Second, I will give a brief history of the territory and how it has come to be that they are now regarded as Palestinian, where Israel has no rights or claims. And then thirdly, I'll talk more about the advisory opinion and the UN resolution, and we'll conclude with some thoughts about where to go from here. Right. So this is the area that we are looking at of the Middle East. And I think one of the most important things to understand that the world has changed significantly since 1979, the revolution in Iran. We used to have a conflict called the Israeli-Arab conflict, as it was known for many decades after the creation of the State of Israel, up until at least 1973 and the Yom Kippur War. But I think from the late 1970s onwards, Israel has been fighting not so much with the Arab states, because Israel now has a peace agreement with Egypt, peace with Jordan, and now even Abraham Accords with a number of Arab states. Israel is still technically at war with Syria and with Lebanon because of the Yom Kippur War, which has never really ended. But the war now really is against Iran, I would suggest. Israel is fighting the Iranian revolutionary regime and its proxies and partners throughout the Middle East. And the most important one is Hezbollah. Hezbollah in Lebanon, but Hezbollah, as you know, is very active around the world. Hezbollah is a truly global terrorist organization. It's based in Lebanon, but it's active throughout the Middle East. It's very active in Jordan and in the West Bank, and right through Europe, Africa, Asia, North and South America. It is a global industry, military, economic, and it's all run by the IRGC, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps. That is the regime's arm which conducts its international revolution. So Iran is threatening Israel, not only directly. Iran has attacked Israel, as we know recently, but it's working through the proxies, and that includes Hamas in the Gaza Strip. The attack of October 7th was orchestrated, financed by Iran. Hamas is very close to Hezbollah. It was training, Hezbollah has been training Hamas in Lebanon, and Iran has been financing Hamas for years, as well as Qatar, of course, and others. But I think Iran, from Israel's perspective, is the main threat. Now, what does that look like close on the ground? Peter talked about the 7 or 8 fronts of this war. 4 of those fronts are directly on the borders of Israel. It's fighting Hezbollah in Lebanon. It's fighting Hamas still in the Gaza Strip. But let's not forget, Iran is deeply embedded in the West Bank, in Judea and Samaria, in cities like Jenin, which have become hotbeds of terrorist organizations. And it is also fighting from Syria. Iran is also very active in Syria, and Israel is conducting continually exercises in Syria to eliminate Iranian military bases and resources. So this is a multi-front war. But I think the 8th front is the legal war. That's what I want to talk to you about. And Iran is involved in that legal war as well. Think of South Africa bringing genocide case against Israel. What does South Africa have to do with Israel? Well, South Africa is financed, it appears, by Iran to bring a case against Israel in the International Court of Justice. There's strong evidence that Iran has been very closely involved with the South African ANC to bring these legal cases. And it's all designed to undermine the sovereignty and the existence of the Jewish state of Israel. What are these occupied territories? It's primarily the West Bank, as it has become known. The West Bank is the mountain region of Judea and Samaria. It is the heartland of this territory. Not only the biblical heartland, historical heartland, but also the strategic heartland. You can see this is the mountain range which runs from the north to the south of Israel. And of course, whoever controls the mountain region will control the coastlands and the plains of Israel. It's only 10 kilometers from the West Bank to Tel Aviv. If Iran becomes established, as it is becoming established, in the West Bank, this is the end of Israel. Iran is a hostile state that is intended to destroy. We don't know how and when, but is building up not only nuclear weapons, but also short and long-range ballistic missiles to be directed against Israel. So this, from Israel's perspective, is a huge threat. And the courts are being used to force Israel out of this territory. That's the point I want to emphasize today. The legal system, the courts are being petitioned by the Palestinians, who are supported by the Arab and Islamic world, to force Israel out of this so-called occupied territory. This is the West Bank from a demographic perspective. We have Jews and Arabs living in the West Bank. The Jews, 500,000 or so, are regarded as illegal settlers by the international community. I think that's wrong. I think that there is no law against settlement as such. There is a law against transporting your population into an occupied territory, but there is no law that prohibits Jewish people from living in these territories, just as there's no law that prevents a Slovakian national from living in the Czech Republic or Australia or the Netherlands. So the idea that it is by definition illegal for Israeli citizens to be living in these territories, I think, is a misuse of the legal system. And I'll explain a little more why I think that's the case. So let's do a little brief history tour for 5 or 10 minutes. How did we get to the point of considering these territories as occupied and occupied Palestinian territories? 100 years ago, after the First World War, or during the First World War, the Ottoman Turkish Empire collapsed. And it disappeared. It was no longer. It was replaced by the modern state of Turkey, the secular state of Turkey, which now is being hijacked, I think, by a certain Islamist kind of regime. But this was a new legal order which came into being after the First World War. The right of self-determination, which we hear a lot about, was only very, very new at this time. It did not really exist. We had colonies. The Western powers had colonized Africa and large parts of Asia. I come from Australia. It was a colony, a British group of British colonies which became an independent state. So the idea of the Allied powers when they defeated the empire was to create a new legal system. The League of Nations was established in 1918 in the Paris Peace Conference. And out of that, they created a system of mandates for the Middle East, but also for parts of Africa and Asia, which had been German colonies. Of course, Germany was defeated. So what to do with Africa? What to do with the Middle East? This was the idea. It was not perfect, but it was a system to help the peoples of the Middle East to become independent. That is the Article 22 of the Covenant of the League of Nations, which created this system. And they were called mandates. The British and the French had the responsibility to establish independent states in the region over time, to help the people to become self-sufficient, independent states. And that is, of course, what happened. The state of Syria was established. The state of Iraq was established. Good morning, Moimir. Welcome. The state of Jordan was established, and Palestine was also intended to become a state. And this is more or less the geography of the Middle East today. This is what the state of Syria looks like. These are the boundaries, the borders, also of Iraq. But we know that in these states live many, many ethnic groups. There is no one ethnic group of Syrians or Iraqis. We have many groups, not only religious, but also ethnic. So it's a very complex process to create states which give also rights to minority groups. Now, in the case of Palestine, it was intended to give effect to the declaration that the British made in 1917, called the Balfour Declaration. The British declared that they would support the re-establishment of a Jewish homeland in Palestine. This was new. This was recognition of Zionism as a legitimate movement of the self-determination of the Jewish people. They have a right to be a Jewish nation in the Middle East because they belong in the Middle East. The history of the Jewish people is unique, said the British, and so we must recognize their right to re-establish their Jewish homeland in Palestine. And on the basis of that declaration, the Allied powers, Great Britain, France, Italy, Japan, and later the United States as well, created this mandate for Palestine. And the core objective of the mandate was to bring about this Jewish national home in Palestine. And you'll see that the map, it's not a very good one, I'm afraid, on this slide, but it consists of everything both west and east of the Jordan River. That's Israel today, that's the occupied territories, and it is the Hashemite kingdom of Jordan. This was all known as Palestine. In 1921, of course, the Arabs did not like the idea of a Jewish national home. Many of them fought against it. Churchill decided in 1921 to separate east and western parts of Jordan, and the east was basically given to the Palestinian Arabs. Jordan is a Palestinian Arab state. The king is a Hashemite from what is now Saudi Arabia. He's not a Palestinian, but most people of Jordan come from this area. And many of them are now refugees from the wars that Israel has fought against the Arab world. So my point here is that this Jewish homeland was intended to be created in the territory west of the Jordan River, having separated Transjordan. And it was in recognition of the historical connection of the Jewish people with the land of Palestine and the growing anti-Semitism in Europe and elsewhere. This was the reason the Jews were coming home, was also to flee from anti-Semitism, and this was recognized in the mandate. Very important also to note that this was all intended to protect the civil and religious rights of every person, Jew and non-Jew, in Palestine. And in my view, the modern state of Israel is built upon this principle that the Jewish state is for everybody. It's not just for the Jewish people, it's for all the people of Palestine. And Israel has always opened its arms to Arabs and other non-Jews who want to live side by side with the Jewish people. 20% of Israelis today are Arabs or other non-Jewish people. Okay. There were many ideas over the course of the mandate about how to create this Jewish homeland. It was impossible to reach an agreement. In 1947, the UN General Assembly came up with a brilliant idea called the Partition Plan on the 29th of November 1947. This idea was launched to create an Arab state and a Jewish state in Palestine, with Jerusalem as an international capital. This is the Partition Plan. It was rejected by the Arabs, it was rejected by the Palestinians, and reluctantly, but still accepted by the Jewish representatives in Palestine. They said, this is the best we'll get. We're willing to accept a state in this very, very, you can see a very, very divided part of Palestine. They were to get the Negev desert, they were to get parts of the Galilee and the northwestern coastlands. But the Arabs would have received everything and more that is now called the West Bank. This was in historical terms, the best proposal that they've ever had, but they rejected it because they did not want to accept the existence of a Jewish state in Palestine. I think it's important to understand right through the decades, every proposal has been rejected, right up until 2008, even 2016, because they cannot accept that the state of Israel exists. Nevertheless, Israel was created on the 14th of May 1948, and the following year it was accepted as a UN member state. And in my view, it is a state under international law. It looks like a state. It satisfies all the criteria of statehood. In fact, it was a very well-developed state. Already from day one, they had a government, they had a parliament, they had a judiciary, they had an executive. They had everything you need to govern a state well. And in that sense, Israel is a modern miracle that out of nothing, suddenly a democratic Jewish state was born. And it has become a success. What were the borders of the state of Israel on the 14th of May 1948? Nobody really knew, and nobody was really focused on the issue because it was a war. Ben-Gurion said at the time, "We will not define our borders. If the Arabs reject our existence, we are not going to be the ones to tell where our borders are with the Arabs." So the Declaration of Independence of Israel does not talk about the borders, it talks about Eretz Israel, which is a broad concept, and it doesn't define exactly. But as a matter of international law, this principle of uti possidetis juris, it's a Latin word, basically says that the state that emerges from a mandate takes on the boundaries of the mandate. It's been a principle that's been applied across the world, even here in former Yugoslavia. The states that emerged out of the collapse of Yugoslavia took on their borders because of this principle. So there's no reason why it should not apply in the case of Israel. Now, Israel has never really adopted this principle until more recently. It's starting to. But now we have one judge on the International Court of Justice who recognises this, Judge Sebutindi. I'll speak a little more about her, and she says this is the legal principle. It means that Israel has sovereignty or a claim to sovereignty right up to the Jordan River, over the whole of Judea and Samaria. It's a very controversial position, of course. Many in Israel do not like that idea because it might prevent a two-state solution. But I think it does not prevent a two-state solution. It makes it even more possible because it clarifies the legal situation. I'll come back. The Court of Justice doesn't agree with me. On the 15th of May, Israel was attacked by 5 Arab states who were threatening or intending to wipe Israel off the map. This was a war to eliminate Israel, not to create new borders. And the result was this situation. For 19 years, Jordan occupied what became known as the West Bank, and Egypt occupied the Gaza Strip. Egypt never wanted the Gaza Strip, still today does not want the Gaza Strip. They kept the Palestinians as refugees, and Jordan as well. But at a certain point, Jordan annexed the territory and gave the Palestinians Jordanian citizenship. And they called this then the West Bank of the Kingdom of Jordan. They regarded the West Bank as part of their sovereign territory. Nobody recognized that except for 2 states, Pakistan and the UK. And in my view, that was an illegal annexation because Jordan had no right whatsoever to be taking that territory because it was destined for a Jewish homeland under the Mandate. I think that's a generally accepted position until more recently. In 1967, Israel won the Six-Day War and took a whole lot of territory, including the Sinai Desert, the West Bank, Gaza Strip, and the Golan Heights, and of course, East Jerusalem, the old city of Jerusalem and its environs. And since 1967, Israel has been negotiating with the Arabs land for peace. That's been the formula. Israel has said, we claim Jerusalem as our sovereign capital, but everything else, we gave back the Sinai to Egypt in 1979, but the other territories we'll treat as occupied, and we will negotiate with the Arabs about the future of the territories. That was the idea. Not to claim sovereignty over the West Bank, but to treat it as occupied, or the Gaza Strip, treat as occupied and negotiate with the Arabs. Now, what has happened, of course, is we have the Oslo Accords, we've had negotiations, but never an agreement has been reached. There's no agreement with the Palestinians about sovereignty over this territory. The Oslo Accords, in my view, a disaster. They created a division without solving the really difficult problems. And the really difficult problem is who owns this territory. Now the Palestinians, since Oslo, have used the courts to claim sovereignty over the West Bank and East Jerusalem and the Gaza Strip. They do that on the basis of the United Nations Charter. The United Nations created in 1945 to ensure peace and security at a global level, but it includes the principle of self-determination of peoples. It's built on the principles of human rights, but it's also built on principles of state sovereignty. The Palestinian and Arab and Islamic worlds since the 1970s have basically rewritten history. They say that the whole idea of a Jewish national home was illegitimate, and this is all part of the UN system. We have committees, we have commissions, we have all kinds of institutions in the UN which are intended really to give Palestine back to the Palestinians. That is the core idea. And it's driven by a majority of UN member states. So they reject not only the partition plan, they reject the Balfour Declaration, they reject the mandate for Palestine. And they claim Palestinian sovereignty. A Palestinian, by definition, excludes Jews, excludes any Jew who came to Palestine after 1920. It belongs to the non-Jewish population. And they have brought this claim into the international courts over the last 10 years. Very important we understand this. They're bringing this political, historical, and legal claim to the courts. And the courts now in the last year have been deciding along the lines of the Palestinian claims. And Israel is being excluded from these courts. And Israel is in fact excluding itself from the courts. Israel is taking a position it does not belong to the criminal court, and it will not participate in the Court of Justice proceedings relating to territorial sovereignty. These are the two courts in The Hague which are the most important: the International Court of Justice at the top, the International Criminal Court at the bottom. And I want to just explain very briefly, Pedro, I know I have very few minutes left, what has happened in this case. In 2022, December, a resolution was adopted to ask the Court of Justice for an opinion on legal questions. The legal questions were, what are the legal consequences of Israel's illegal occupation of Palestinian territory? Okay, so the answer was already given in the question. It's illegal, it's Palestinian territory. What are the consequences? The court was presented with a fait accompli, a one-sided resolution, and it was presented with facts and legal arguments which only addressed the Palestinian claim. Israel was not present in this case. It was a decision of Israel not to be involved and not to present its legal case. I think, in my view, that's a mistake. Israel should be there. But I also understand that they regard this as an illegitimate legal process. It's a difficult issue for Israel. But the point of this slide is just to show you that the resolution of 2022 was only adopted by 87 member states. That's less than half. And they're all Arab, Islamic, or African states, with a few others. Very hostile to Israel. And we in the West have allowed this to happen because we abstained from voting, or a small number of states voted against, but only few. So we're kind of allowing this whole process to happen. The Palestinians put their case to the court. This is the leader of the Palestinian delegation, the British, French, Jewish barrister, Philippe Sands. He's very successful, very well known. He led the legal case, and their claim is that Palestine belongs to the Palestinians, and Israel must be removed from the occupied territories. And it's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pages of documentation and legal arguments. They were supported by 50 UN member states. They were supported by the Arab League, the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, and the African Union. These are all organizations with a policy of promoting the Palestinian case. In the case of the Islamic states, it is to liberate Jerusalem and the whole territory from the Zionists. That is what the Islamic states are pushing for. And this is the legal case. Now, we have judges on the court. The president, Salam, is a Lebanese former diplomat. He is a Muslim and he is extremely hostile to Israel. He was very much involved in this case. The vice president you see next to him is the Ugandan judge, Sebutinde. She is a Christian and she is very sympathetic to Israel. And they both issued very different legal opinions. According to Salam, he says the UN approach is the correct one, and our role as the court is simply to place a stamp on the UN's resolutions. Sebutinde says, no, you have to go back to history, you have to look at the history of the region and understand the security concerns of Israel. And she wrote a very, very important dissenting opinion. I won't go into detail, we don't have time, but there she is. Three other judges were very important. They included the Slovakian judge, Tomka, who wrote an opinion with a French judge and a Romanian judge. And he also said, this is crazy. It's legally wrong to say that Israel must withdraw from the territories. He says there's no legal basis for that decision. They, however, are in the minority. The majority of the court, 11 of the 15 judges, have decided that Israel must withdraw from the occupied territories as rapidly as possible. This was in July this year. The opinion came from the court. And in September, in New York, a resolution was adopted by 124 member states to affirm the court's opinion and demand Israel's withdrawal, unilateral withdrawal, no agreement with the Palestinians, no security guarantees, nothing to protect Israel. Israel must be out of those territories, every Israeli, civilian and military, by September of 2025. That is the UN. And it calls upon member states like Slovakia to make sure that this is happening. I think, just to bring this to a conclusion, what we are seeing then is not only a denial of Israel's legal rights and positions, but also the undermining of its sovereignty and its right to exist and to defend itself. If you look at the Gaza Strip and the war against Hamas, we know how difficult it is to get these terrorist organizations out of these territories. It's a very difficult and complex war. The same will happen in the West Bank if Israel is required to withdraw. Remember, Israel withdrew from Gaza in 2005, and the result was Hamas. And this is Israel's fear. If that happened in the West Bank, it will be Hamas and even worse, right on Israel's doorstep. That is why Israel cannot and will not comply with this resolution. Absolutely no way. Israel knows it has to stay in these territories, not only to protect its own security, but also the security of ordinary Palestinians from Hamas, that they're not subject to Iranian terror regimes. And many Palestinians, they would probably not admit it, but they would prefer to live like Israeli Arabs under a state that is governed by the rule of law, that protects human rights. This is the dilemma. And in my view, the only way to achieving peace in this region is through cooperation with Israel and creating some regime. It may be a Palestinian state, it may be something much less, but some system that gives them some independence, but makes sure that they are operating within the context of Israeli sovereignty and security. This territory is so small, you can't simply divide it and separate it. So I think a lot of work needs to be done, and I would encourage Slovakia to take a strong position on this, like all EU member states should. It's difficult because the EU position is that these territories belong to the Palestinians. The two-state policy in Brussels, I think, is a big mistake. We have to break through this paradigm and look for a new way, a new paradigm for peace and security between Israel and its neighbours. Thank you very much.
Ďakujem nášmu prvému speakerovi, Andrew Tuckerovi. A ten čas sme prešvihli len o 1 minútu, ale zároveň súčasťou toho času bolo aj kladenie otázok. A ja by som ešte tých 5 minút tomu venoval, ak dovolíte. Tú prestávku si môžeme skrátiť. Súhlasíte? Dobre, ak súhlasíte, tak potom máte aj otázky, predpokladám. A teraz je priestor na vaše otázky. Tak ak niekto má nejakú konkrétnu otázku, Andrew je samozrejme k dispozícii. A mikrofón tiež. Tak pán Grigori Mesežníkov.
Po anglicky.
Po slovensky? Je to tlmočené stále, takže asi
Nedávno palestínska delegácia v OSN podala taký návrh na vylúčenie Izraela z valného zhromaždenia. Nakoľko sa vám zdá tento návrh realizovateľný, vôbec teoreticky, z formálneho hľadiska?
Je to? Tak daj po anglicky ešte, prosím, lebo asi
Recently,
tlmočníci.
Palestinian delegation made a proposal to General Assembly of UN to expel Israel from the General Assembly. How realistic is this proposal?
Can I use this one?
Yes.
Yeah. So that's a really excellent question. The Palestinians are wanting to expel Israel from the General Assembly. I think in the short term it's not very likely. But there is a mechanism, it has to do with the credentials. I think they're challenging the credentials of Israeli representatives as being somehow in breach of international law. It would need to be accepted by the Security Council. So I think the General Assembly cannot exclude states from the UN. It would have to be a Security Council. I think with the new administration from January, that's very unlikely. But you see the Palestinians pushing as much as they can through before January. So they will be pushing for Palestinian statehood, full statehood recognition within the UN before January. They're not a full member yet. They are a permanent UN non-member observer state, which is not quite full membership. They want to be fully recognized as a state. So they will be pushing that into the Security Council.
Thank you. Ak sú ďalšie otázky, nech sa páči, mikrofón je k dispozícii.
Thank you. Thank you very much. My name is Oliver Chris. I would like to ask you to know your opinion about the, let's call it a ceasefire, not a peace, with Hezbollah that came into power yesterday night. So will it last, or was the strategic benefit or not? What will be a future of this? Thank you.
Look, obviously I don't know, but we've seen a lot of ceasefire agreements over the last couple of decades, right? In Gaza. So this new one is not a new kind of ceasefire. It's more or less the same as 2006, which established Security Council Resolution 1701 that prohibited Hezbollah from going south under the Litani River. Look, in my view, it's just a question of time before Hezbollah is going to relaunch. I mean, we have to understand we're dealing with a regime which has an objective, and that objective is to destroy the state of Israel. Not only the state of Israel, but the West generally. I mean, this is the mindset of the current regime in Tehran, which is driving Hezbollah. So they will be taking their time. They will reuse this time to build new tunnels, to rearm themselves. And Israel will do everything it can in the meantime to make sure that doesn't happen. But at a certain point, I think there will be a new wave of attacks or threats of attacks. Now, it may be that Israel is the first one to take a preemptive strike. Israel sometimes has to do that, and then everybody will argue, well, Israel is breaching the ceasefire. It's a very complicated thing. But, let's not forget, before October the 7th, Hezbollah had 150,000 rockets and a vast tunnel network, much bigger than Gaza, under the mountains on Israel's border. So we're dealing with a really existential threat.
Nech sa páči, ďalšie otázky, ak ešte máte.
Ja by som možno tak z pohľadu jednoduchých ľudí zo Slovenska, ktorí vnímajú teda tieto informácie, že aké je postavenie štátu Libanon ako z toho medzinárodného hľadiska, lebo všetko je akoby dovolené, že môže iná krajina mať svoje nejaké silové zložky na cudzom území.
I'm not picking this up. Can you translate that for me, Pedro?
Ešte raz tú otázku, prosím, lebo ja som teraz sám... What is the... Pardon.
Otázka je teda, že aký je vzťah teda k štátu Libanon a Izrael a Irán, a teda aj z toho medzinárodného práva postup štátu Libanon, že dovoluje teda inému štátu, aby teda bolo na ich území silová zložka, ktorá ohrozuje zase iný štát. Že ako vláda Libanonu je zodpovedná teda v tom celom dianí. Ďakujem.
Yeah, it's a very good question. On one side, Lebanon is indeed allowing Hezbollah to operate. So that is a basic infringement of international law to prevent. I mean, ever since 9/11, we have Security Council resolutions requiring states not only to counter terrorism, but to prevent terrorism. That's why we have these organizations on our terror lists, to sanction them, that they can't operate. So Lebanon has a responsibility to ensure that Hezbollah is not able to become established to threaten not only its own people, but also the neighboring states. But it's a very complicated situation because Hezbollah is both in the government, but it's also a terror organization which has its own infrastructure and government and army. So it's like a state within a state. And I think international law finds it very difficult to deal with this because we've never seen this before in quite the same way. But I would say the main thing is Lebanon's responsibility to ensure that it is not used as a platform for terror. And Israel would like to see normal relations with Lebanon, of course. But that's very difficult if Lebanon is allowing itself to operate in this way.
Okay. Ak je ešte jedna otázka, tak by som dal priestor na poslednú. Potom si dáme...
Oh, yeah.
Je ešte? Ak nie, tak potom môžeme urobiť krátku prestávku, predtým, než pripojíme nášho hostia z Jeruzalema. Už sú na linke, takže spojíme sa s nimi, otestujeme pripojenie. Vy si medzi tým dajte kávu. Poprosím do takých 7, maximálne 10 minút, keby sme boli späť na svojich miestach, aby sme mohli pokračovať.
Pardon.